When you consider the enormous gap that Goku had in power between himself and Vegeta after the battle on Namek, and even after the time period that had passed when Goku was on planet Yardrat and returned to Earth, it's quite astounding what Vegeta managed to do. In just 3 years, Vegeta was basically able to not only equalize Goku, but according to what Piccolo said, even surpass him in the fight against the androids. And the impressive thing about this is that theoretically you would think that if Goku and Vegeta were at a certain gap where Goku was a lot stronger from beforehand, and if he trained equally as hard as Vegeta, Goku would still be way above Vegeta. So this brings up a really good question. Why exactly is it that Goku, after the 3-year gap, was a lot, well, we shouldn't say a lot, but noticeably weaker than Vegeta according to what Piccolo said? Well, the key reason with this is we have to analyze 4 factors. The first thing that we have to say is that when you look at Vegeta's training situation specifically, Vegeta was using assisted training. Now, something that we have to understand is that in the manga we literally never got any idea about any of this at all because basically all of the training was shown off screen. But in the anime variation as opposed to the manga, we actually got definitive answers to this because looking at Vegeta specifically, if he is incrementally increasing the difficulty of his own training by pushing his body to limits that he never went to before, by increasing the amount of gravity that he trained at, and he did this over the course of several years, plus what the anime also showed of Vegeta training in outer space, you have to consider that the extensively more difficult, harsh environment of outer space combined with the gravity training would definitely mean that Vegeta would get significantly greater gains out of this. Now, once again, we're talking about the anime adaptation because, like we said before, in the manga we never got a chance to see any of this. The characters just trained off screen for 3 years and then they just came back the way they were. But, from what we saw with Goku training with Piccolo and Gohan, Goku, Gohan, and Piccolo were just training outside, and if you just think about it like that, they didn't really go through any type of assisted training, and because of that, and also because of the fact that Goku was training with 2 weaker characters, this would clearly mean that Goku would have to suppress how he's fighting against both Gohan and Piccolo over the course of these years because there's such a massive gap in between them that if Goku was to train at 100%, he really wouldn't be able to fight on par with them because the gap between them is so big, and as a result of it, Gohan and Piccolo were really the ones that benefited from actually training with Goku than the other way around. And when you consider the assisted training that we saw in the anime specifically, that would be the first clear reason as to why Vegeta was able to attain a greater strength than Goku over the course of this time period. But there's also some other things that we have to point out here too. And specifically talking about Piccolo, what we have to point out is that he gained way more than any of the 3, plus even Vegeta, because obviously, even though Vegeta was stronger than Piccolo by the time that they were fighting against the androids, when you think about how strong Piccolo got proportionately to Vegeta, it's far greater, because even if he's weaker, the gains that he got relative to his own strength are by far the best, and it would actually make logical sense why Piccolo would gain so much, because compared to Gohan, as compared to Goku, obviously not counting Gohan's hidden power and stuff, Piccolo is closer to Goku and Vegeta in terms of power, so he can push himself more training against Goku, and Goku can push himself more training against Piccolo, so it would actually make sense for Piccolo to have gained the most out of it, because he could hold his own with Goku more. Now, this brings up an interesting question about Gohan, because obviously, Gohan gained a lot too, but the problem is that relative to Goku and Piccolo and even Vegeta, what Gohan gained didn't really matter because he was nowhere near as strong as the other characters, so we kind of just wrote him off until he fought in the Room of Spirit and Time later, which we'll talk about in a second. But when we go back to how strong Piccolo got over this time period, it was obviously known because Android 20 was very confident in himself being superior, quote-unquote, than the Android 19 model, and if we consider that Android 20 is theoretically stronger than Android 19, well, that would mean that if Piccolo could easily defeat Android 20, then that would mean theoretically Piccolo should have also been able to fight against Android 19. And if you actually go back to the scene where Goku got the heart virus, we will actually remember that Piccolo was actually getting ready to go in and fight, and it would make logical sense because looking at how the fight was turning out, he said that he got distracted by Vegeta coming in, and that's why Android 20 was able to basically attack him. So, factoring in all of these major points, it makes the absolute most sense why Piccolo was able to gain the most, and it's also very incredible because we also have to factor in how strong is Piccolo relative to the Super Saiyans. Based off of the performances against Android 19, it seems like Piccolo was definitely a tier below the Super Saiyans like Trunks, Goku, and Vegeta, but he's not that far behind. And that's also incredible too, because Piccolo didn't even, fuse with Kami prior to all of this, so if he had fused with Kami and he had trained like that in the future timeline, one would think that he would have been able to maybe not defeat the androids individually, but definitely be able to survive over the course of years, where he and Gohan in privacy training could actually get strong enough to fight against the androids. But because Gohan, once again similar to what Goku had a weaker training partner in Trunks, he was never able to actually fully achieve his potential in the future timeline. Now this brings us back to Gohan one more time again, and now we're going to talk more about the present version of Gohan. The anime kind of goes through all of this, and specifically dealing with Gohan, we actually understand more how his training with Goku actually worked in the Room of Spirit and Time. But the interesting thing about it is that Gohan actually pushed Goku into pushing him more. And clearly, if we could use context clues from the training that they would have done over the course of those 3 years, Gohan probably felt that what he went through over those 3 years wasn't satisfactory, even though he never mentioned it. And as a result of this, the training that Gohan would have done with Goku in the Room of Spirit and Time, on top of having assisted training, not specifically in terms of gravity, but more so the actual environment, even though the Room of Spirit and Time does have greater gravity, but when you combine that with the harsh conditions, Gohan would have gained far more out of training in the Room of Spirit and Time, especially because he has an entire year to train with Goku, and because Goku would have not held back as much against Gohan in the Room of Spirit and Time compared to what he would have done during the 3-year time skip. That would also make more sense why Gohan, after already training with 3 years and then training for another year after that, would have gained so much. And when you really think about it, I mean, it even goes to show why the present version of Gohan was just so much stronger than future Gohan, because even though 13 years had passed, you have to factor in that Gohan trained for 4 straight years, combining the 3-year gap before the androids plus the Room of Spirit and Time before he even fought against Cell. And that's training that the future Gohan never had, and when you factor in the future Gohan never even had the 3 years of training with Goku and Piccolo because it was a time of peace, then everybody dies and he has to train by himself. It makes very logical sense why future Gohan was never able to get as strong, because he missed 2 important sets of training, and then he had to train by himself, and then he had to train with a weaker partner. So all of that pretty much summarizes why Goku himself didn't gain that much over the 3-year gap and why Vegeta surpassed him.